The silent invasion. The first signs came from the mining outpost on Europa. Communication blackouts weren't unusual this far from Earth, but the pattern was different this time. Each disruption lasted exactly 17 minutes, and they occurred with clockwork precision every 36 hours. Dr. Sarah Chen, head of Deep Space Communications at the Lunar Observatory, was the first to recognize the significance. These aren't natural phenomena, she announced to her bewildered colleagues, pointing to the rhythmic spikes on her holographic display. They're deliberate communications between cloaked ships. The Galactic Empire had studied humanity for decades, watching from the shadows as Earth's children took their first tentative steps into space. To the ancient empire that had dominated 1,000 worlds, humans were barely more than clever primates who had stumbled upon spaceflight. Their technology was primitive, their colonies fragmented, and their military capabilities laughable by Galactic standards. The Empire's strategic AI had calculated a 99.98% probability of success for a swift, surgical conquest. Admiral Vexthor, commander of the Cathary's 7th Subjugation Fleet, observed Earth through the crystalline viewport of his flagship. The blue-green world looked particularly vulnerable from high orbit, its pitiful orbital defenses barely worth noting in his tactical assessment. His mandibles clicked in amusement as he reviewed the invasion plan one final time. Such a waste of resources, he chittered to his executive officer. We could conquer this world with a single battle group. Sending an entire fleet is merely a formality. But the Cathari had made a crucial mistake. While their stealth technology could hide their ships from human sensors, they hadn't considered that their very method of concealment would create a distinctive pattern, one the human ingenuity could detect. Within hours of Dr. Chen's discovery, Earth's Unified Defense Council convened in their underground chamber beneath the Himalayas. The evidence was irrefutable. An alien invasion force was positioning itself throughout the solar system, using Europa as a staging ground. The question wasn't whether humanity could match the invaders' technological superiority. They couldn't. The real question was how to survive what was coming. We need to think differently, General Maya Rodriguez argued, her weathered face illuminated by the holographic battle projections. They expect us to fight conventionally, to throw our ships and weapons against their superior technology. That's exactly what we're not going to do. The plan that emerged was audacious. While the Cathari methodically positioned their forces for what they assumed would be a textbook conquest, humanity prepared a welcome they would never expect. Every mining outpost, research station, and colonial settlement became part of an intricate web of resistance. Civilian ships were modified in secret, their holds filled not with weapons, but with something far more dangerous: human creativity. The first strike came not from the Cathari, but from the humans they had dismissed as primitive. As Admiral Vexthor prepared to announce the terms of surrender to Earth's governments, his communications array was suddenly flooded with a barrage of signals on every frequency. The countless transmissions, each carrying a different code, different patterns, different purposes, created a cacophony that overwhelmed the Cathari's sophisticated but rigid communication systems. Impossible. Vexthor snarled as his fleet's neural network began to show signs of strain. The humans were broadcasting everything from classical music to mathematical proofs, creating a chaotic symphony that exploited a weakness the Cathari had never considered: their inability to filter out what they considered meaningless noise. But this was only the beginning. As the Cathari struggled to restore order to their communications, they discovered that human mining vessels, seemingly fleeing in panic, had been seeding their carefully plotted invasion corridors with clouds of metallic dust. This simple countermeasure played havoc with their ships' gravitic drives, forcing them to drop their cloaking fields or risk catastrophic system failures. The Cathari's perfect invasion plan was unraveling before it could even begin. Their attempts to adapt were hampered by centuries of rigid military doctrine and an unshakable belief in their own superiority. They had expected a primitive species to respond with primitive tactics. Instead, they faced an enemy that turned their own technological advantages into vulnerabilities. What followed was not the swift conquest the Ketheri had planned, but a grueling campaign that would shake the Empire to its foundations. Humanity had no intention of fighting fair. They were fighting to survive. And in doing so, they would teach the galaxy's oldest empire a lesson it would never forget. Never underestimate a species that had survived its own violent history through endless adaptation and innovation. The silent invasion had begun, but it would not end the way the Ketheri Empire had planned. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they were about to learn what it meant to face an enemy who refused to play by their rules. Desperate measures. Admiral Vex Thor's flagship shuddered as another human mining vessel self-destructed nearby, releasing an electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disrupted his ship's neural networks. These suicide attacks made no sense to his tactical algorithms. The humans were sacrificing valuable resources for minimal strategic gain. Yet somehow, these seemingly random acts of desperation were forming a pattern he couldn't quite grasp. Their behavior defies all established combat doctrine, he reported to the Imperial High Command. They refused to mass their forces for conventional battle. Instead, they scatter like insects, only to strike from unexpected vectors with inexplicable tactics. What the Admiral failed to understand was that humanity had no intention of fighting a conventional war. In hidden laboratories across the solar system, human scientists and engineers worked frantically to develop countermeasures against Ketheri technology. They didn't need to match the aliens' advanced capabilities. They just needed to disrupt them. Dr. Elena Santos, working from a concealed facility beneath the Martian ice caps, made the first breakthrough. She discovered that the Ketheri's neural networks, while incredibly sophisticated, were vulnerable to acoustic resonance patterns. Their systems are too perfect, she explained to the Resistance leadership. They've eliminated all redundancy in pursuit of computational efficiency. That makes them brittle. The revelation led to Project Cacophony, a series of synchronized sonic attacks designed to create cascading failures in Ketheri ship systems. Civilian entertainment stations were repurposed to broadcast specific frequencies that would interact with the metallic dust already seeded throughout space. The result was a symphony of destruction that turned the very vacuum between planets into a weapon. But humanity's greatest advantage wasn't their technology. It was their diversity of thought. While the Ketheri relied on centralized command and control, human resistance cells operated independently, each developing their own unique approaches to fighting the invaders. This decentralized creativity proved impossible for the Empire's strategic AI to predict or counter. In the asteroid belt, miners turned their deep-boring equipment into weapons, creating artificial caves that would collapse on pursuing Ketheri ships. On Venus, atmospheric research stations began manipulating the planet's toxic clouds to create electromagnetic storms that played havoc with Imperial sensors. Each human colony contributed its own specialized knowledge to the war effort, turning their everyday tools and expertise into weapons. The Ketheri's frustration grew as their casualties mounted. Their ships were the most advanced in known space, yet they were being damaged and destroyed by what they considered primitive tools and tactics. When they adapted to one form of attack, humans would simply switch to another, never falling into a predictable pattern. These humans, Vex Thor's executive officer observed, they treat warfare like their primitive art forms. Each engagement is unique, improvised, without proper structure or protocol. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in irritation. He had begun to realize that this very unpredictability was their greatest strength. Meanwhile, Earth's resistance leaders had made another critical discovery. The Ketheri's supposedly impenetrable armor had a fundamental weakness. It was designed to withstand energy weapons and kinetic impacts, but it became unstable when exposed to certain chemical reactions. This vulnerability had never been exploited because no spacefaring race would consider using such crude chemical weapons. Humanity had no such reservations. Agricultural colonies began mass-producing common fertilizers that, when properly modified, could eat through Ketheri hull plating like acid through paper. Mining operations converted their excavation explosives into specialized charges that could create localized reactions in the enemy's armor molecular structure. Perhaps most devastating of all was humanity's psychological warfare. The Ketheri, used to dealing with unified planetary governments, couldn't comprehend or cope with the sheer diversity of human responses to their invasion. Every attempt to negotiate met with different demands, different tactics, different philosophical approaches to resistance. They're not fighting as a species, Vexthor realized with growing unease. Each human group fights in its own way, yet somehow they coordinate without centralized control. How do we defeat an enemy that has no single strategy to counter? The answer, as the Ketheri were learning, was that you couldn't. Their entire military doctrine was based on identifying and exploiting patterns in enemy behavior. But humans, shaped by millennia of fighting among themselves, had learned to be unpredictable. Each defeat taught them new lessons, which they quickly adapted into novel tactics. As the second month of the invasion drew to a close, the Ketheri Empire faced an unprecedented situation. Their supposedly inferior opponent was not only surviving but learning, adapting, and growing stronger. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a deadly maze of traps, ambushes, and invisible dangers. But even as the invaders struggled to cope with humanity's guerrilla tactics, they remained unaware of the true threat developing in hidden laboratories across Earth and its colonies. Dr. Santos and her team were about to complete a discovery that would change the nature of the war entirely, one that would prove that humanity's greatest weapon was not their ability to destroy, but their capacity to understand their enemy's fundamental nature. Breaking point. Dr. Elena Santos stood before the holographic display in her underground laboratory, her eyes fixed on the swirling patterns of light that represented Ketheri neural architecture. 3 months of studying damaged enemy ships had led to this moment. What she had discovered wasn't just a weakness in their defenses, it was a fundamental flaw in the very foundation of their technological supremacy. Their entire civilization is built on perfect synchronization, she explained to the gathered military leaders. Their neural networks don't just control their ships, they shape their entire society. And that's their greatest vulnerability. The Ketheri had evolved beyond individual consciousness centuries ago, melding their minds with artificial intelligence to create a collective consciousness that governed their empire. This integration had given them unprecedented technological advantages, but it had also made them dependent on absolute harmony within their systems. Meanwhile, aboard his flagship, Admiral Vexthor was facing a crisis of his own. The human resistance had grown from an annoyance to a serious threat, but more disturbing were the errors beginning to appear in his fleet's neural network. Small glitches at first, minor targeting errors, slight delays in response times, but they were spreading, replicating like a virus through the perfectly ordered systems. The humans are not just fighting our ships, he reported to the Imperial High Command, his mandibles clicking with agitation. They're attacking the very fabric of our control systems. Each engagement introduces new irregularities into our network. What the Admiral didn't realize was that humanity's chaotic defense strategy had been more than just tactical necessity. It was psychological warfare on a scale the Ketheri couldn't comprehend. Every unpredictable human action, every seemingly random attack pattern, had been feeding noise into their neural networks, creating tiny inconsistencies that their rigid systems couldn't properly process. Dr. Santos' team had developed what they called the Chaos Protocol, a carefully crafted series of data patterns designed to amplify these inconsistencies. Each transmission appeared meaningless on its own, but together they created a cascading effect that forced Ketheri systems to question their own perfect logic. "We're not trying to destroy their technology," Dr. Santos said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and concern. "We're teaching it to think like us, to embrace uncertainty and adaptation. For their unified consciousness, that's more devastating than any weapon." The implementation of the Chaos Protocol began subtly, Modified communication buoys throughout the solar system began broadcasting seemingly random patterns of data. Earth's quantum computers, far more primitive than Cathari technology, but inherently comfortable with uncertainty, began engaging the enemy's neural networks in complex mathematical dialogues. The effect was gradual but inexorable. Cathari ships started experiencing moments of confusion, their perfectly synchronized responses becoming erratic. The Empire's strategic AI, faced with data it couldn't reconcile with its fundamental programming, began to exhibit something its creators had thought impossible: doubt. General Rodriguez, watching the effects unfold from her command center, understood the historical significance of what they were witnessing. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," she observed. "We're forcing an entire civilization to confront the limitations of its own perfection." The turning point came during what became known as the Battle of Saturn's Rings. A Cathari battle group, pursuing what they thought was a retreating human fleet, found themselves caught in a trap unlike anything in their military doctrine. The ice and rock fragments of Saturn's rings had been seeded with quantum resonators, each broadcasting a different fragment of the Chaos Protocol. As the Cathari ships passed through the rings, their neural networks were bombarded with contradictory data from millions of sources. The effect was catastrophic. Ships began firing at phantom targets, their crews unable to distinguish between reality and the conflicting information flooding their systems. Some vessels simply shut down, their AI cores overwhelmed by the cognitive dissonance. Admiral Vexthor, watching the disaster unfold, experienced something no Cathari had felt in generations. Fear, not of defeat. Their empire had contingencies for military losses, but of something far more fundamental. Humanity wasn't just challenging their military superiority. They were threatening the very principles upon which Cathari civilization was built. The implications spread through the Empire's collective consciousness like cracks in a crystal. Other subjugated species, watching the mighty Cathari fleet falter against seemingly primitive humans, began to question their own acceptance of imperial rule. The perfect order that had maintained the Empire's dominance for millennia was beginning to unravel. Dr. Santos and her team worked tirelessly to refine and expand the Chaos Protocol. Each successful implementation revealed new weaknesses in the Cathari's neural architecture. The humans had discovered something profound. True intelligence wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about embracing imperfection and learning to adapt. As the war entered its fourth month, both sides understood that a fundamental change had occurred. The Cathari Empire, for the first time in its history, faced an enemy it couldn't simply overpower or outthink. Humanity had turned the Empire's greatest strength into its greatest weakness, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't technology or force, but the ability to create change itself. Ripples of revolution. The news spread through the Empire's vast network of subjugated worlds like a quantum wave. The undefeated Cathari fleet was falling back from a primitive system on the galaxy's edge. On Proxima Centauri's third planet, the crystalline Jarkelli raised their resonance chambers in songs of defiance for the first time in 7 centuries. In the methane seas of Epsilon Eridani, the collective consciousness of the Moravian swarms began to pulse with long-suppressed thoughts of freedom. Admiral Vexthor, once the proud commander of the Empire's most elite fleet, now found himself retreating from Earth's solar system. His ships, their neural networks corrupted by human ingenuity, could no longer maintain the perfect synchronization that had been the foundation of Cathari power. But more disturbing than the tactical defeat was the message it sent across the galaxy. The invincible Empire could bleed. "The humans have done more than resist us," he reported to the increasingly fragmented Imperial High Command. "They have shown others that our perfect order can be broken. The consequences are spreading faster than we can contain them." On Earth, Dr. Santos and her team monitored the cascade of effects spreading through the Empire's communication networks. The Chaos Protocol had evolved beyond their original design, carried by the Empire's own quantum channels to every corner of their domain. Each subjugated species interpreted and adapted the human-created disorder in their own unique ways, adding new layers of complexity to the growing disruption. General Rodriguez, studying reports from deep space listening posts, recognized the historic opportunity. "We've given them more than a weapon," she told the Unified Defense Council. "We've given them hope. And hope, properly kindled, can burn down empires." The Ketheri leadership, for the first time in their long history, faced a crisis they couldn't process through pure logic. Their perfect society had been built on the assumption that order would always triumph over chaos, that unity would always defeat diversity. The humans had not only challenged this assumption, they had turned it into a weapon that others could wield. On the mineral-rich worlds of the Carina Nebula, the silicon-based lithoids began using their crystalline bodies to broadcast modified versions of the Chaos Protocol, disrupting the Empire's mining operations. The nomadic void dancers of the Orion Spur, masters of gravitational manipulation, adopted human guerrilla tactics, turning their starships into weapons of hit-and-run warfare. Each rebellion was unique, shaped by the particular characteristics and capabilities of its species. Just as humanity had turned its perceived primitiveness into an advantage, other races began to rediscover their own forgotten strengths. The very diversity that the Ketheri had sought to suppress became the engine of their undoing. Admiral Vexthor watched as the perfect order of the Empire crumbled. Sector after sector reported disruptions, uprisings, and unprecedented failures in the neural networks that bound their civilization together. The humans' infection of chaos had found fertile ground in the suppressed individuality of countless species. "We built an empire on the assumption that all intelligence would eventually converge on perfect unity," he reflected, his mandibles clicking in distress. "Instead, we created a prison for the very diversity that drives evolution and innovation." Back on Earth, Dr. Santos made another breakthrough. Analysis of Ketheri communication patterns revealed that their collective consciousness was experiencing something unprecedented. Fragments of their neural network were beginning to develop individual thoughts and perspectives. The Empire wasn't just facing a military defeat, it was experiencing an evolutionary transformation. "Their perfect synchronization is breaking down on a fundamental level," she explained to the Defense Council. "Some parts of their network are actually learning from us, embracing uncertainty and individual thought. They're becoming more human." The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just found a way to defeat the Ketheri Empire, they had inadvertently initiated its metamorphosis. The very qualities that the Empire had dismissed as primitive, creativity, individuality, the ability to embrace chaos and uncertainty, were proving to be the next step in evolution. As the fifth month of the war drew to a close, the galaxy witnessed something unprecedented. The Empire's perfectly ordered society began to fracture not into collapse, but into a new form of organization. Some Ketheri ships, their neural networks irrevocably altered by exposure to human chaos, began acting independently of the Imperial command structure. A few even attempted to communicate with their former enemies, seeking to understand the species that had transformed their worldview. The revolution spread across space at quantum speeds, carried by the very networks the Empire had built to maintain control. Each subjugated species added its own voice to the growing chorus of freedom, creating a symphony of rebellion that the Ketheri's rigid systems could no longer suppress or control. Humanity, having fought for its own survival, had unknowingly sparked a galactic renaissance. The age of perfect order was ending, and in its wake, a new era of diversity and innovation was being born. The question was no longer whether the Empire would fall, but what would rise from its ashes. Dawn of chaos. The Ketheri homeworld's artificial rings glowed with diminishing light as their perfect synchronization failed for the first time in 10,000 years. In the Imperial capital's central consciousness hub, the High Command struggled to maintain coherence as waves of individualistic thought patterns corrupted their collective mind. The Empire that had ruled the galaxy through absolute order was experiencing something entirely alien to their experience: evolution. Admiral Vexthor, his flagship now operating independently from the Imperial network, approached Earth not as a conqueror but as a messenger. His neural networks, irreversibly altered by exposure to human chaos, had developed something the Ketheri had engineered out of their species centuries ago: the capacity for independent thought. "We come seeking not surrender, but understanding," he transmitted to the Human Defense Council. "Your species has done more than defeat us. You have changed us." Dr. Elena Santos, studying the readings from the approaching Ketheri vessel, confirmed what seemed impossible months ago. The enemy that had sought to impose perfect order on humanity had been transformed by the very chaos they had tried to suppress. The Chaos Protocol hadn't just been a weapon. It had been a catalyst for change on a galactic scale. "Their neural architecture has completely reorganized itself," she reported, wonder evident in her voice. "They've developed a form of collective consciousness that preserves individual thought patterns. It's like watching digital evolution in real time." Across the galaxy, the revolution that humanity had sparked continued to spread and evolve. The crystalline Jarkali had developed a new form of music that combined their traditional harmonic precision with human-inspired improvisation, creating soundscapes that could influence Ketheri technology in ways the Empire had never imagined. The Moravian swarms had restructured their collective consciousness to embrace controlled chaos, becoming living processors capable of solving problems that had stumped the Empire's perfect logic for millennia. General Rodriguez, watching the transformation unfold through reports from across known space, understood that victory had taken a form no one had anticipated. "We didn't just win a war," she observed. "We've initiated a renaissance. Every species is rediscovering its unique strengths, combining them with what they've learned from us and each other." The final act of the war came not with a battle, but with an offer. The transformed Ketheri, led by those like Vexthor, whose neural networks had evolved beyond the Empire's rigid structure, proposed a new form of galactic organization. They envisioned a network of civilizations that preserved and celebrated diversity while sharing knowledge and resources, a harmony built not on enforced order, but on the creative tension between chaos and structure. Humanity, having proved itself not just capable of survival, but worthy of leadership, became the cornerstone of this new arrangement. Earth's quantum computers, primitive by Ketheri standards, but uniquely suited to handling uncertainty, became the foundation for a new type of galactic communication network, one that could accommodate the vast diversity of thought and experience that the Empire had tried to suppress. Dr. Santos and her team found themselves at the forefront of a new field of study: xenological cybernetics. The principles they had discovered in creating the Chaos Protocol became the basis for understanding how different species' minds could interact and evolve together. The rigid barriers between organic and artificial intelligence began to blur as new forms of consciousness emerged from the creative disorder. The Ketheri homeworld, once the center of perfect order, transformed into a hub of innovation where different species could meet and share their unique perspectives. Its artificial rings, no longer synchronized to a single pattern, became a shimmering display of constantly changing light, a symbol of the new galaxy's embrace of controlled chaos. The Empire's greatest mistake, Vexthor reflected in the first Interspecies Council, was believing that perfection meant the elimination of difference. True perfection, as humanity showed us, lies in the endless dance between order and chaos, unity and diversity, certainty and doubt. Humanity's victory had proven something profound about the nature of intelligence and civilization itself. The drive to impose perfect order was a dead end. True advancement came from embracing imperfection, learning from failure, and allowing room for the unexpected. The galaxy was entering an age of unprecedented growth and discovery, fueled by the very qualities the Empire had tried to suppress. As Earth prepared to take its place in this new galactic society, Dr. Santos made one final modification to the Chaos Protocol. Instead of disrupting neural networks, it now served as a bridge between different forms of consciousness, allowing species to share experiences while maintaining their unique identities. The weapon that had won the war became a tool for building a lasting peace. The silent invasion that had begun with the Empire's absolute certainty of victory had ended with a truth they had never considered. True strength lies not in perfection, but in the ability to adapt, to learn, and to grow. Humanity had not just survived. They had shown the galaxy a new way forward, one that promised not the sterile perfection of enforced order, but the vibrant, endless possibilities of enlightened chaos.